Welcome to Rettle's Pub, where we talk about the spirits while partaking of spirits. Here are your hosts, Nate and Mason.
So welcome to Rettle's Pub.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You're here. I'm glad I'm finally being able to see you after 25 years.
I know. That's crazy. That makes us sound really old.
The gray and the beard.
Yeah. You know, I don't have any gray yet. I know a lot of women cover theirs, but I really don't have any to cover. So, knock on wood. Oh, yeah. I am. Yeah. I always say it's because I don't have kids. Kids make you go gray.
That's got a lot to do with it. I was looking at a photo the other day, and in 2020, my beard was black, right? And
wow.
The kids make it old. So we were excited because, I'll say this again, is that you helped Nathan in a past life experience.
Sorry, we're having technical issues.
We're having technical issues?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
I'm blaming you.
You see these paintings behind me, Adam?
I've been spying them.
Some of them are my grandfather's.
Really?
My grandpa Driscoll's, the bluebird, or the red bird, the flower, the pond scene. I don't know if you can see that. And then there's the rose scene right here, which he painted for my grandmother for one of their anniversaries. And then another piece over here, my sister Candace did when she was a little bitty, like 8 or 9. And then Trace had that one, and the bluebird, commissioned for me. And then I just got that one up at the very top. I don't know if you can see, it's a little square way up there, but we were just in Fernie, British Columbia, and that's a street scene a local artist did. So it's kind of my art wall.
I have been, the whole time we've been chatting, I have been drawn to the red bird.
Oh, I know, isn't that beautiful?
I have been looking at that one this whole time.
That's at least 50 years old, likely older. I have a much larger one over here on the wall you can't see. That's I think it's a 5x5. It's a huge painting that he did in the 50s. So about 53, 54, before my dad was born. So it's pretty cool.
How does it make you?
But I'm not artistic. So.
How does it make you feel knowing that you have that bond, that soul tie?
That what?
The bond, the reincarnation bond.
Oh, very cool. Very, very cool. Like, I spent a lot of years, I guess, ignoring it and pretending I didn't have it. But if I look back now, I noticed that, or I realized that I had it even as a child. And obviously it was spiritualized in a totally different way. So it was celebrated, but yet not really understood, I guess I could say. And so I've always had that gift, and when I've finally accepted it and started living in it, it's been an amazing experience. It's really amazing.
It's
really amazing.
That's how you and I we grew up together. I tell everybody we grew up together, right? And
we did.
The one thing about twin flames is that your twin flame will awaken you, bring you to a spiritual awakening, right? And I don't know if I'm stepping over, but the day you made contact with me on Facebook Messenger, right, and asked about psychics and mediums and how that is viewed in light of Scripture, that was absolutely mind-blowing to me. And I had to deep dive into that.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah.
Tell us about your past. How did you grow up?
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a really small East Texas town of about 700 people, and I always say that was counting cats, dogs, and chickens. Because it was true. Really small. Literally everybody, it's very true. Literally one road went through town and there was not even a stop sign on that road. So it was very small, kind of idyllic. My father pastored a very small Apostolic Pentecostal Church. We weren't even UPC. We were stronger and stricter than UPC, United Pentecostal Church Incorporated. So Grew up very wonderful family, but very strict background, very dogmatic in the beliefs. And from a really young age, I think I had questions. I didn't quite understand some of the things, some of the tenets of the belief system. I really, of course, you're taught not to question, right? You know, especially, I'll be honest, as a woman, you definitely don't question. And so I'm always been a little outspoken, as Adam can attest to. So just a little bit. I always say it's just honesty, and my husband says, yeah, but honesty sometimes hurts. I'm like, well, maybe you needed that honesty then. But I digress. But I always did kind of question inside, and I have this very vivid memory of when I was in third grade. Even though I was being raised Pentecostal, I went to a private school that happened to be of another belief, and the teachers there were all Christian, but they were different belief systems, Baptist, Assembly of God, whatever. And one of my favorite teachers was obviously not Apostolic Pentecostal like me, but she was like the greatest Christian I knew. She was so kind, so gentle, so loving, just truly a godly woman. And so I remember I got in the car one day when Mom picked me up, and I'm just going to make up a name so I don't use her real name, but I said, Mama, is Miss Jones going to heaven? And she said, well, does she have the Holy Ghost? Now, you got to realize the Holy Ghost and the way I grew up is evidence of speaking in other tongues, right? And I said, well, I don't think so. And she said, well, then there's your answer. And I remember being very flabbergasted at, what is this, 8, 9 years old in third grade, going, wait a minute, the greatest Christian lady that I'm ever exposed to, and this is when I'm surrounded by, people of like faith, is not going to heaven just because she doesn't speak in tongues. Like, I remember having that confusion even then. So long story short, grow up, get married to a apostolic Pentecostal preacher, because that's what you do when you're a Pentecostal preacher's daughter, is you marry a Pentecostal preacher. So I did, and kind of started on this journey. We started evangelizing pretty much as soon as we got married, and I'm just going to tell you my journey out, if that's okay. Is that good? Okay. So it didn't start till I was in my 30s. We had been evangelizing for quite a few years, and we moved to Bend, Oregon to start a new work. And we started it from scratch, and it was really doing well. It was really getting off the ground. And so I, of course, had been to Bible school, and I'm a third generation Apostolic Pentecostal on my dad's side, second on my mom's. That's all I've ever known. So I thought, and I was a Bible quizzer, so I thought I knew all the scripture I could ever know, right? But I go to Trace, and my husband, and I tell him, if I'm going to start teaching these ladies how to be a Pentecostal lady, then I really need to understand it better, because I feel like I've been taught it, but I don't know if I really understand all the tenets and really, know where to tell them where to find it in the Bible. And so it started from a completely honest, innocent, really a longing for truth. Just, I want to make sure I'm telling these people right, because you got to remember, up here in the Northwest, I'm in the great state of Idaho now, but in the Northwest, Pentecostal is not a thing. And our area of surrounding towns is about 100,000 population, and there's one very small Pentecostal church of probably less than 30 people. So it's just not a thing. You say Pentecostal, people don't know what you're talking about. They really don't even know what that word means. And so I knew I was starting from scratch, with these women, teaching them how to be Pentecostal. So I just really did a deep dive into scripture. I went to all the scriptures that I knew, that I've been taught, and I would look at the scriptures above, and I'd look at the scriptures below, and I'd look at the context, and all of a sudden I'm like, but that doesn't make sense. That's not what I was taught. And so then I'd go to the next set, and I'd do the same thing. And the more I dug, the more confused I became. And it was like somebody was shining a light into my brain. And it's one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And I literally was disturbed, obviously, because this goes against 30 some odd years of teaching in my life. I remember feeling very, very betrayed. I felt like I kept telling myself, they lied to me. They've lied to me. And I remember really feeling betrayed. So I thought, well, I'm going to look at the historical context of this then, from the Pentecostal view. So I go and I get some well-known, if I said their names, you would know them, Pentecostal authors Yeah, holiness books, and historical books of the UPCI. Because even though I was Apostolic Pentecostal, obviously we followed the UPCI's general doctrine, just with some stronger, holiness standards, and that only just means tighter, stricter rules for those that don't know. But so I start looking and I start reading, and I go back to the beginning of when the Assembly of God and the UPCI split, and this is like the 1940s. This is not that long ago, really, in real life. And they talk about they would go door knocking wearing their pearls and wearing their jewelry and cutting their hair. And wait a minute, what? Wait a minute. So I really started going, this is just, excuse my language, this is BS. Like, I don't understand. I've been lied to. So I go to Trace and I'll tell him what I'm finding. And of course, that discussion was not necessarily a happy one. he was, because again, we've both been taught you don't question, right? And for me to come up and question was almost like a slap in the face to everything we had both known and loved and been taught. So it's a very disconcerting thing to have that meet you here. And so I realized, okay, he's not with me. He's not at the same place I'm at. So I just started calling people that was in my life that I knew that had got out, that had left at some point. One of them was a third cousin, who's my dad's age. But I got a hold of him and called him and talked to him, and I was like, and again, if I said his name, you would know him. Tell me your story. Tell me how did you deal with all of this? Because yes, you feel betrayed. You feel absolute fear, because you're going to be shunned. You're going to lose your whole social circle, everybody, including my family. What do you do with that? How do you do with that? How do you reconcile what you're seeing and what you've been taught? It's two very, very different things. So this went on for several months, talking to different people in my life and kind of keeping it to myself, still going to church, still playing the part, not really bringing it back up again because I knew it was a touchy subject with my husband at the time, and I didn't want to cause any issues and discontent on his side of things. And I realized, I've been around long enough to know that for people that have revelations, it has to be a personal revelation, period. And so, long story short, after a year or so of this, he says, we need to move back down south. He literally says, I got to get you back in a Pentecostal church. And I says, well, that's great, but I'm not going to a strict church, period. So I'd already cut my hair. I'd already trimmed it like 1/4 of an inch, and it was to my mid calf. So, whoa, wow. I'm big sinner over here. But so we moved down south. We moved back to Texas and started going to a very large church that was very what my parents would consider loose. And they weren't real happy about us. They were happy we were, in church still, but not happy that we were going to this particular church. And we were there about 18 months. And I just felt like every time I went to church, I was like, I'm living a lie. My hair's getting shorter as the months go by. I'm playing around with some other things. I think it was during this time we bought our first TV, which he's a big TV lover. So that wasn't a hard sell. That was actually his ideal. So for those of you who don't know, obviously TV was a no-no in our world. And it's a huge no-no. It's like almost the ultimate sin. Because it leads to all the others, right? It opens the door.
It's a gate. What is a gateway?
Right?
It's a gateway.
It is. Yeah. Yes, it is. Like, because all of a sudden you're exposed to other ways of thinking, other ways of seeing things, other ways of dressing. Like, it's I guess they think you're not going to get that exposure anywhere else in the world.
Now, the hypocrisy of television,
they just don't get out much,
is that the UPC did not allow it in your home. But if you were a pastor and you had a travel trailer, you could have a television because it wasn't in your home.
Right. Or they would record their services even back then.
That's right.
And release them on VHS.
That was okay too.
Their conferences. Yeah, that was okay too. It was always funny to me, like, okay, you're recording this and you could buy it on VHS, but you're not supposed to have a TV and VCR. So where are you going to play it? I mean, it was ludicrous,
well, for us,
truly.
We hid our VHS in the closet.
Oh, I know a lot of preachers that did that. Yeah. A lot of pastors. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Even up until we left officially left, the pastor where we were at that time, he did the same thing. He literally had
And when
the
Celeste and I
TV in
were
the
first
closet.
married, we would actually go borrow it or rent it from Blockbuster. So we didn't own it,
Oh yeah,
but we still
right.
watched. Yeah.
So it was okay.
I mean, it was.
Right.
I would drive
yeah.
across Houston to go rent the movies, so I wouldn't
See when you
see
caught.
renting the movies at Blockbuster.
Of course.
I-
Yeah, absolutely. Because
Yeah,
that was the
yeah.
whole point, right?
No,
You couldn't
it
be
was more
seen.
about the appearance than it was the actual legalism or whatever, the righteousness of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember very vividly, being with multiple pastors, and one of them would order a virgin cocktail at a restaurant, but please make sure it's in a regular glass because I don't want anybody to think I'm drinking. I mean, come on, really? Like, how pathetic, I mean, come on. But anyways, so after about 18 months there, we still were, I'm still living the lie. And so we end up getting a call from a pastor in Louisiana, right on the Texas border, to come and Trace be associate and me do the music. And so we took it, and not really knowing much about them. And we get there, and they're UPC, and super controlled. Not necessarily in the way of standards. I mean, he was pretty strict, but more just an overall control freak. He was a little bitty short man. Trace always said he was compensating for something. Because he was this little bitty short small man, and it's like he was like the proverbial chihuahua, I'm a pastor, this kind of thing. So we're sitting there, and I'm doing his music, and I'm hating every second of it, and I'm telling God at this time, I'm at my wit's end, and I'm telling God, you've got to either change my heart back to the way it was and let me unsee what I've seen, or change his heart. He needs his own revelation, but it's got to be one or the other, because this is not, I can't continue to pretend I'm living a lie. And we're several years in now of me doing this, so there was a couple of incidents that happened while we were at that church that really kind of, I guess, was the last nail in the coffin, as they say, of my faith. And one of those was, and I'm going to share it because it just shows how traumatic that belief system can be. We were acting as youth pastor, and we had a van full of teenage kids, and we get invited to go to this youth rally. As you know, those are a big thing on Friday nights because there's nothing else you can do.
You can't go to movies or ball games.
No, these kids are just stuck at home, and so you go to a youth rally where they're going to get preached at, not to, but preached at, and shamed, and go to the altar and cry. I mean, what a great time that is, golly. So this was in Louisiana, so we traveled to this. It was a very large church, I will say. And remember, at this point, I'm like at my breaking in. Like, I'm okay, God. Like, we're on a ticking time bomb here. Like, we got to do something. And so we fill up a whole row. And while we're waiting for service to start, across the aisle, I notice these people coming in, and they fill up. I'm not lying, like 8 or 10 rows of teenagers. And there's a few adults sprinkled in, and the girls are wearing blue jeans. The boys, they're definitely, you could tell by looking at them, they're not Pentecostal. They're definitely not. And so, I was like, oh, that's great. This is a community-wide thing. Maybe it's not just on, Pentecostals only. It's not geared towards that. And it was an okay service until the preacher got up, and he was an evangelist, and he was like the hottest new thing around. You know how they always do that. They always get the hottest new evangelist, who's got the name. And he gets up there and he starts preaching, and then he literally comes to that side of the church, down that aisle, and starts screaming about girls wearing blue jeans. And he doesn't talk about pants. He says blue jeans. And there's 8 or 10 rows of these kids. I'm talking junior high and early high school kids, 13, 14, 15 years old, wearing blue jeans. I was so mortified that I literally could have just went under the pew in front of me. I was so mortified. So finally he gets through yelling. He does the altar service, and I stepped out. I have no intention to go to the altar. I'm going to be honest with you. I stepped out of the way. All the kids file past me. And as I do, these other kids start falling out and leaving. And one of the little Pentecostal women from that church runs up to the youth leader of this other group. Come to find out they were from a local Assembly of God church. And she shakes her hand and she says, "Thank you so much for coming. We'll let you know when we have the next event." And the lady says, "No, we'll never be back." And I literally just followed them out, and I went to this lobby, and I found the darkest corner I could, and I bawled my eyes out. And right then and there, I told God, I cannot be a part of this any longer. This abuse, this blindness to anything else that's not like you. If it don't look like me, and it don't walk like me, and it don't believe like me, then I don't want nothing to do with it, and I have to change it to be like me. And I just told God, I cannot be a part of this anymore. This is not what you had to mean when you set forth the Bible and you set forth faith and you put all these things in. That could not have been what you meant. And so I got the keys and I went and I sat in the van until they were done. And I called my favorite aunt who had grown up Pentecostal and had left as a teenager, and just cried to her pretty much all the way home, like on the front seat, like hiding my conversation from the kids. And it was just a week or two later, we're sitting in church, and the pastor there at our local church gets up, and he kind of starts on the same thing. It's kind of almost the same situation. There was a little girl that she had come off and on. She came with one of our youth, and her parents were not in anything. I think it was a really rough home life. And so she would just come straight from school to that Pentecostal kid's house and then come to church with her on Wednesday nights. So whatever she wore to school that day is what she wore to church that day. And so of course she'd wear blue jeans or whatever. And the pastor literally walks in front of her pew. She's sitting on the second pew and he's at the front pew and just yelling. His eyes are closed, but he knows where he's at. He's just yelling about this. And Trace looks at me and he goes, "He said that out of anger." And I literally, it's like a light bulb went on. I could see his countenance change, like instantly, just, holy crap, what just happened? And within a few days, it was over. Like, that was it. Like, he said, "I'm done." He had a conversation with a family member who was actually a UPC pastor. And he said that UPC pastor told him, he said, "God's convicted me." He said, "Because we demand so much more of our women in the Pentecostal movement than we do our men." And he said, that's the same as just about every other major religion if you want to stop and really think about it. And he said, God convicted my heart about that. So he had quit preaching standards at his UPC church in Louisiana because God had convicted his heart about that. And I think that was also a big thing for Trace to hear, someone that he looked up to say, wait a minute, something's not right with this. And so Trace apologized to me. He cried and apologized, and he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "I've demanded so much more of you than I have of myself in this belief system." He said, I'll never do that again. Well, we were coming up to Valentine's Day, and we had planned to go out of state for Valentine's Day. And the Wednesday before, Trace worked a lot of weeknights, so I would go to church by myself and do their music. And so after service, I'm sitting in the vestibule about to leave, and the pastor comes running up, and he's, "I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you." Remember, this is a little short dude that thinks he's all that in a bag of chips. And so I said, "Okay." And there's people all around us. And he says, "You run my altar service." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You run my altar service. You chose the wrong song." And I'm just looking at him like, is he being serious? I thought he was joking almost at first. And as you know, Adam, I've been doing this since I was 9 years old, playing piano at church and choosing altar songs. And I just really looked at him. He's like, you're the reason nobody came to the altar. I just was like, okay. And I walked out and I got in my car and I called Trace at work and I said, "I'm not going back. I will not walk back in that building again." So over the weekend, it was like on Friday or Saturday, we left home to go out of town. And that pastor calls and he calls Trace and he says, "I want to talk to your wife." And Trace says, "No, you're not talking to my wife. You're going to talk to me." And he says, "No, I want to talk to your wife." And Trace says, "No, you're going to talk to me. What's going on?" He already knew the situation, obviously. He already knew, what had happened. And he said, "Well, where are you?" And Trace said, "Well, we're in another state." And he said, "Well, you turn around and come back right now. I'll meet you at the church." And Trace said, No, we're not doing that." And he said, "Well, if you're not going to come around and meet me right now, then don't bother showing up at church on Sunday." And Trace said, "Okay." So Monday morning, we went to the church and we slid our keys with a nice little letter underneath the door. And that was that. We've never been back in a Pentecostal church since. So that was our journey out. But it was a 5-6 year journey for me completely. Trace a little less time. But what was so weird is once we left, of course, there was a year or two of dealing with all of the leftover emotion the trauma that you don't even realize you've experienced. I had to go to therapy for 2 years. Of course, therapy was a no-no, as you know, Adam. I'm assuming you were taught the same. So that was a huge step for me to even admit that I needed to go to therapy and realize that, okay, I have to literally unlearn everything. I felt like a teenager, even though I was in my 30s. I felt like, when you're a teenager and you're just graduating high school and you're going out into the world and you're getting to know yourself. That's what I felt like. Literally in my 30s, I'm like, I'm just now figuring out who Amanda is. I'm just now figuring out what I believe, what I think, it was a life-altering experience. But so we shortly moved back to the Northwest, and it took about 2 years for my parents to come around before they would acknowledge us. Very sadly, Trace's dad died before they made amends. He disowned Trace and died of cancer.
Let me interrupt. So,
sure, absolutely.
You deconstructed, right? We'll use that terminology. And because of your deconstruction, both of your parents cut you off. Wouldn't have anything to do with you.
Absolutely. Yep. I remember the first picture I posted on Facebook with cut hair. I said, oh God, this is going to start a shit storm. And it did. That is when all of a sudden my parents forgot my birthday. They forgot, Christmas. They literally never called me for 2 years. I never heard from them. And our relationship hadn't been, I wouldn't say it would have been the best or the closest, but to be completely abandoned like that was honestly a lot of the trauma that occurred with the whole thing. I know that I remember going to a therapist and sitting there crying, and I felt like a 4-year-old and saying, I feel abandoned. And she would say, who? Why? And I said, my mom. And even though my mom and I, up to that point, had that close relationship, I literally felt like an orphan. Again, in my middle 30s. I just felt like, you love me, but you love me based on the fact that I do what you've taught me to do. I live like you've taught me to live. I please you. And so your love is conditional. And so that was a really hard pill to swallow and a lot of trauma to get through, to figure out, I had to be okay with it. I had to be okay with that relationship being essentially non-existent, for 2 years. And then when it finally came back around, it was a very, it's weird. So we've been out now, we always celebrate in February. We always have a drink to celebrate our coming out party. But it will be 9 years. And, but it took a while for my parents to come around and to have that conversation of, this is how we're going to live. And if you don't like it, that's okay. We've had it once in 9 years, and that was only last year. So it's just kind of been one of those things that we've ignored. We are back in contact. In fact, I would say now I'm closer to my parents probably than anybody else in my family, my other siblings, truly. But it's taken a lot of work to get there, a lot of changing on my part of understanding them. And I'll be honest with you, I look back and I really feel pity,
yes,
for people that are still in that brainwashing.
Yes,
truly. I really do. I feel so much pity for them and just so much sadness, that I hope they can get out. But like my parents, I know that's never going to happen, obviously. But I have nieces and nephews that are still young, and I'm like, hold out hope.
I explained to Nathan when we started the podcast, I don't know if it was recorded, but I basically stated, and you'll get this, is that our parents were our enforcers. And the UPC were our
100%.
parents. UPC raised us. It was our parents that did the enforcement and the grooming. That was the word I used. We were groomed by our parents.
Yeah.